Okay, I think we could get started. So welcome everybody. We are in the middle of the story of Jephthah, and it is quite a story. We will be working on it this week, and we will have a little bit to continue next week as well. But this week, we're going to be dealing with what I consider not only the most difficult part of the story, but one of the most difficult stories in the Bible. And that is, of course, the story of Jephthah's vow. So, excuse me, if you recall last week, we talked about a little bit about Jephthah's character. And we saw that on the one hand, he had a difficult childhood. He was a bastard child. He was shunned by the rest of his siblings and ended up being kind of putting together a militia. He seemed to be a bit of a wild and crazy man in a sense. If you can read that from the fact that he had this militia of people and they weren't really part of any kind of organized society, but they were kind of living out there in the wilds. And we saw that it was very important for him. He didn't want to just, he clearly was a successful military professional, but it wasn't enough for him that they would ask him to lead them into battle. He wanted to also be a leader. A complete leader, a political leader as well. And we saw two different ways of seeing that. Either it could have been extremely legitimate for him to have more a sense that his army is behind him, that he's not just their captain, but he's also their leader that commands respect and they want to fight and die for him and for the cause. And that's very important. On the other hand, you can wonder whether is there a bit of a desire, perhaps a bit of arrogance, perhaps a desire to gain legitimacy from his clan, from his tribe, that had been denied to him until now. So keeping all that in mind, one of the things that we begin to see about Jephthah is that there is an element here of immaturity, or there's an element here of rashness, of kind of shooting from the hip. And we can see that a logical development from the kind of person he was. He's shunned, he runs away, he's got a band of armed men. And then when they come to him, he says, no, I want this. I want to be a leader, and he catches them in a very weak spot. So he's able to get what he wants because they do need him and his military capabilities. But it also may tell us something about his character. Is he really the kind of person that should be a leader? Okay. And I think as we move on into this next story, we begin to ask that question even more. So first of all, we'll start with verse 32. And we already see that Jephthah is, verse 29. Okay. Now we already read this. For this particular verse, I think we read last week. This is right after he concludes his negotiation with the Ammonites. He makes it very clear to them that he is not going to give back the land, and therefore it seems very clear that there's going to be war. So the first thing we find out is in verse 29 that the Spirit of God settles upon him, okay? Immediately following, he begins his preparation for war. And it says he marches through Gilead and Manasseh, passing Mitzpah of Gilead. From Mitzpah of Gilead, he crossed over to the Ammonites. Okay, let's skip verse 30 and 31, and then we go to 32. Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites and attacked them, and the Lord delivered them into his hands. He utterly routed them from Aroer as far as Minit, 20 towns, all the way to Abel Kramim. So the Ammonites submitted to the Israelites. If we skip verses 30 and 31, we see that we have a very solid description of a battle. He goes from one place to another, gets to a certain place, he engages the enemy, he continues, he defeats them, he captures all these cities, and they surrender. End of story. It's a story of a battle with a hero who comes out victorious. Now, however, in the middle, we have something else. We have the story of his vow. So we have as follows, verse 30. And Jephthah made the following vow to the Lord. If you deliver the Ammonites into my hands, then whatever comes out of the door of my house, whatever, okay, let's talk about that. Whatever implies a non-human being, whatever, an object, okay? Whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me on my safe return from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's and shall be offered by me as a burnt offering. Okay, now why do I say whatever? The truth of the matter is, in Hebrew, the words can be either whatever or whoever. Whatever comes out, whoever comes out. The Hebrew itself is totally ambiguous. It can apply to either one. And that is critical in trying to understand what happened here. Okay? So this is what he says. Whatever or whoever, what comes out of my house, okay? When he comes back, he will bring this as an offering to the Lord. What happens next in verse 34? Jephthah arrived at his home in Mitzpah, and there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrel and dance. She was an only child. He had no other son and daughter. And we see that this is a very common thing. Later on, we will see with David, after David slays the Philistines, Goliath, and then the Philistines, and he comes back victorious, we have all the women of Judea and, coming out, singing and dancing and greeting the hero. So this is a very, very common thing in the Bible, and we see it here. She comes out dancing with whatever to welcome the hero who has come back. And then we see something very, very important fact. She was an only child. He had no other son or daughter. On seeing her, he rent his clothes and said, "Alas, daughter, you have brought me low. You have become my trouble, for I have uttered a vow to the Lord, and I cannot retract." I mean, we know the story. What's going on here? He made a vow. Whatever, whoever comes out from my house first to greet me as I come back victorious from the Ammonites, I will bring that as an offering. And the first thing, person, whatever, that walks out of his door is his daughter, and it's his only child. So scripture makes sure to tell us how tragic this is. He made this vow, frankly, recklessly. Whatever, whoever, okay? And we'll discuss in a minute, what could he possibly have had in mind? But it was just like, God, he's clearly a man of faith. He believes in God. He believes very strongly that it is really in God's hands whether he will win. And the idea of making a vow is legitimate. This is the kind of thing that very often we see in the Bible, someone who is seeking God's help. It's not making a vow in the sense of, I'm gonna make a deal with you, God, okay? It's much more, God, if you save me now, I will do something for you. That's the idea of I will bring a sacrifice. I will express my appreciation. And this is something, by the way, the Jewish people do to this very day. I mean, you're not supposed to take your vows lightly, and you're supposed to do it very, very, very carefully. But it's very common for someone to say, let's say before he goes in for a serious operation, he may say something like, God, if I come through this, I pledge that I will give a nice sum of charity to, a good cause. Or it'll say, I pledge, I will, read scripture every day for a month, for half an hour a day. This kind of thing is a very common thing. But of course, this is the type of vow that just indicates our appreciation, dedication to God, and desire to kind of show our appreciation and to kind of immerse ourselves in some way in a deeper connection with God. This is very similar to that, because the end of this vow is that he's going to bring a sacrifice. But the question is, what is he going to sacrifice? How did he word this? What did he really mean? Okay, so first of all, one of the things that I want to point out when we started reading this, and I said skip verse 30 and 31, and then we came back to it, by putting this clearly, this whole story, okay, we have a few verses about his going to war and his victory, okay, but when we put the vow in the middle there, okay, it changes the focus of the story. We saw that if we read those verses without the story of the vow, it would be the beginning and end of a story, that he comes out victorious. By putting the vow there in the middle, it changes our attention, and we start to think, wait, first of all, on the positive side, this is not just about a victory, a hero, and how he is going to, come back, with this wonderful victory, but we're putting God in there. And that's a very positive thing. There's a recognition of the hero before he goes to war that he understands that this is God's fight. Okay, God is going to either be on his side or won't be on his side, but God is the one who's ultimately in charge. But on the other hand, in the way he words his vow, we understand then that there's a certain tension. What happens when they do have victory? The next thing you want it's not the end of the story, because as soon as we know there is a victory, what we know then is basically the vow has a condition. And if there's a condition that is fulfilled, then there's another part to that. So the victory that he is his condition, God, if you bring me victory, well, that has happened. That leaves you then in suspense. How is Jephthah going to fulfill his part of this deal? And that, of course, hones you in on the whole story of the vow itself. Okay, now one of the things that's also a bit ironic here, and I read this somewhere, this is not something I came up with on my own, but right at the beginning of the story, in verse 29, the first thing we learn is that the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. And there's a bit of an irony here, because clearly Jephthah does not know that. Because if he knew that the Spirit of God had come, we don't see any part here where God speaks directly to Jephthah. We see that he speaks to God, but we don't have a direct communication from God to Jephthah. And so we, the readers of Scripture, we're being given an insight that he doesn't have. And that is that the Spirit of the Lord rested on him. Now, if he knew that the Spirit of the Lord was on him, he probably would never have made a vow. He would have realized he didn't need it because God was already with him and he was going to see him to victory. So that also, there's a kind of irony there, but an irony that also makes us wonder, was he a bit rash, not only in how he worded his vow, but was he a bit rash in the very fact he even made the vow to begin with? Because maybe if he had stood for a moment, tried to look inside his own spirit, try to give it a better understanding of, is God communicating with him? Perhaps he would have heard this or sensed the Spirit of God, and that might have avoided this whole story from happening. Okay, so that's the first issue. But now the second question is, what was it that Jephthah had in mind? And I want to throw out both questions, and I would love for you guys to open your mics and just give me some thoughts that you have. My first question is, what was Jephthah's intention? Okay, did he mean anything or any whatever animal? In other words, an animal that would come out of the house, the first animal that walks out of the house, I will sacrifice him. Or did he have in mind a human being? Or did he have in mind either of them? So that's the first question. What did Jephthah have in mind when he made this oath? And the second thing was, what actually happened to the daughter of Jephthah? Actually, I'm going to save that question because we haven't read the text for that yet. Let me hear this one. Do you have any comments or thoughts? What have you heard or studied in the past? What was Jephthah's intention when he made this vow? Anyone? Yes.
Well, in antiquity, and maybe now, and I know in modern Switzerland, the animals live under the house as a part of the household. So and we have some scripture references where someone took a lamb in the house, from the house. So it was quite possible that a lamb would come from his house to meet him.
Okay, that's a good. And Claudette, you wanted to say something?
I honestly think that he wasn't having any intention of saying it. It's like something off the top of your head, but like you said earlier, that, you want to impress God or you want to get God's in your favor, you make a promise. But you have no intention of keeping this promise, but because of the society at the time, when you make a vow, you have to keep it.
So you're saying, you're going even further. You're saying that Jephthah didn't even really mean to make a vow. I don't think that really is supported in scripture, because I think from the beginning, he makes the vow to God, he states it, and then as soon as the daughter comes out, he says right away, I'm lost. So I think it would be very hard to say that he didn't intend to take his vow seriously. Diane, what would you like to say?
Right. Well, I was going to say that the last thing in his mind, I'm sure, was that his daughter was going to be coming out to meet him.
Oh, sure.
But there's that little phrase in here where he says, whatsoever cometh forth to meet me.
Right.
And I'm thinking of all the people I know who have dogs, and as soon as their foot is out of the car, the dog is either at the door or has rushed out the door to meet them. So I'm sure he was thinking of an animal that was particularly close to him, that he was willing to sacrifice this, whatever animal it would have been.
Okay, that's very good. Now let's look at some of the wording here. So you're saying in verse 31, whoever or whatever comes out of the door. So there are people that will say the words here used, come out of the door, is words that would normally only apply to human beings. People who think and walk out. I know that's not what you're saying, Diane. I'm just saying, I'm going back. This is one way of saying it. And Diane, you're saying that this going out from my house could easily be a dog, or another kind of animal, a pet of that kind. Now, I'll ask another question, because there are very clear rules in the Bible of what animals you can bring for a sacrifice, and a dog is not one of them.
Oh, you couldn't bring a dog, right?
No, it has to be a pure animal. So it could be a lamb, and it could be a cow. It could be certain birds. But it cannot be a dog, and it can't be a donkey, and it can't be a camel. And so these could have been the kind of animals that would have been coming out of the house as well.
But also, you can't offer a human either.
No, of course not. No. Of course not. Especially. So in other words, what I'm saying is that even if you're to say that he was intending it to be an animal and didn't consider it might be a human, again, especially if we go with Diane's way of looking at it, which makes a lot of sense, man's best friend, a dog you can't offer either. So that also doesn't, I mean, it's certainly not as tragic as a situation with his daughter, but it still begs the question, how could he be so inexact in wording his vow that he didn't say the first sheep that comes out, the first animal appropriate for sacrifice to come out? He doesn't say that, okay? And so again, there is this debate, and I'm not going to solve the question today, because very good and smart people out there have come out on different sides of that debate. There is one classical commentary from the Middle Ages that gives a very interesting interpretation. It's actually rather unique. He says that he basically is saying anyone or anything that comes out. And what he's basically saying, if it is an animal that will come out, then we look at the end of verse 31. It says, shall be for the Lord and shall be offered by me as a burnt offering. And what he says is, you can read that, and shall be offered by me as a burnt offering, as an or shall be offered as a burnt offering. So that if it is a human being who walks out, then he will be dedicated to the Lord. If it is an animal who walks out, then he will be sacrificed to the Lord. Okay, now that's an interesting, a very interesting interpretation. And again, I'm just putting it out there because it is very troubling. And and what troubles us about this? Because we can say that Jephthah is a rash human being. He's sloppy, he's whatever, he's a wild kind of guy. It's very hard for us to imagine that he would purposely intend to bring a human sacrifice. Everything about, the message of the Bible, beginning with the aborted sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham. The resounding message that's coming out from the Bible since that point is God does not want human sacrifice, period. And these people are living among the Canaanites where human sacrifice is common and perfectly acceptable. And it's very possible, I read in one place, that this was something that you found among the Ammonites. Now, these are the people that they're actually fighting against, the people that have been surrounding them, influencing them. So there's someone who theorizes, well, maybe he was in favor of human sacrifice because he absorbed that from the Ammonite culture. I find that very hard to believe because it's so antithetical to everything that the Bible stands for. And Jephthah is clearly a man who has faith in God. I think it would be very hard to believe, especially as part of a vow to God, that he would purposely consider that he wants to bring a human being. So I personally think it is more likely that it either was thinking animal and was sloppy in the way he said it, or he just said anyone without thinking, because he just wasn't thinking. He was an impulsive person who didn't think.
Also, he said, sorry, there's Olah both times, Ha'alitihu and Olah, that would suggest it wasn't sacrifice, will lift up to the Lord.
No, but Olah is a burnt offering.
It's but it's sort of the lifting up, which...
Lifting up for sure, but I think this word Olah is really the word that you see in Leviticus for this very specific kind of offering that goes on the altar and is burned to a crisp. There's some of the offerings, only part of it goes on the altar and part of it the family takes back and eats part of it, or part of it goes to the priests or whatever. But when you have an Olah, that is all to God. So that's also an expression. It can be a very rash expression. It's very extreme, all to God, okay? No middle way. It's like today, somebody would make a vow and say, I'm going to recite an hour of scripture every single day for the rest of my life. Now, that's a really bad vow. That's very extreme because you don't commit yourself to the whole thing, limit yourself, put something in limitation. And this shows how it's just going all the way. And of course, this is a huge problem. So now the question is, what actually happens?
Just a second. Can I say something?
Sure, Ruchama.
It's very interesting what Pauline said, because I compare it that when Abraham took Yitzchak, he did not, I heard from a very good rabbi that I appreciate very much, that he did not mean to sacrifice, but a spiritual elevation.
Okay, but that's interesting. So it's the same idea as what Pauline.
So it's the same idea that if a daughter is not kosher for sacrifice as a certain animal, so it's also a kind of elevating here spiritually.
Okay, so now the question is what actually happens.
My question is then, are there any vow requirements or any vow, criteria, maybe that's the word I'm looking for, that Jephthah would have been thinking of that, any ancient?
Well, look, his vow fulfills the requirements of a vow. He makes it very clearly. There's an if and then. In other words, here's the condition is fulfilled, then I have to do this. So that's the basic structure of a vow, and that's here, okay? But there's things that can be done to mitigate a vow, and we'll get to that as well. Anyway, so I want to now look at what actually happens, and that may also give us an indication. There's also not so clear what happened, okay? But let's follow that along, okay? So of course, as soon as his daughter comes out, he immediately understands right away he's in trouble. So clearly, from his behavior, he understands that his vow encompassed her, okay? That even whether or not he meant for an animal to come out, in his mind, it encompassed his daughter. And as soon as his daughter walked out the door, he understood that this made her the subject of his vow, okay? And that goes to really, I think, strengthening the idea that this did encompass human beings. Now the question is, for what purpose? Okay, so he says, and she's of course a very righteous woman, and she says, no, whatever it means, you've got to fulfill your vow. You don't just, you just don't abandon your vow. So she says, let this be done for me. Let me be for 2 months, and I will go with my companions and lament upon the hills, and there bewail my maidenhood or my virginity. Okay. So that's what she asked for. She wants 2 months to be with her friends and to be in this remote area, to mourn what will happen. But she doesn't say, mourn my impending death. She says, mourn my virginity. What does she mean? Does she mean that she will die without ever leaving any children after her? Or does she mean she is now going to have a life of virginity? Okay. Now, go, he replied. He let her go for 2 months, and she and her companions went and bewailed her maidenhood upon the hills. After 2 months' time, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed. She had never known a man. What did he do? What did he do? So there is a question here. Did he really kill her? Did he really bring her up as a human sacrifice? Or did he put her up in the mountain or somewhere as a nun? I don't know, as a woman living on her own, okay, devoted to God. She was, let's say, what this kind of is consistent with. Could we read this as being either, if it's a human being, if it's an animal, bring it up as a sacrifice, and if it's a human being, bring her to God, shall be of the Lord. So basically what that means is, instead of bringing up her as a burnt offering, does he just put her to the Lord, and she is devoted to praying and, serving God alone somewhere. She's a Carmelite nun or something like that, off there, not speaking to anybody, and she's by herself. And then it says, so it became a custom in Israel for the maidens of Israel to go every year for 4 days in the year and chant dirges for the daughter of Jephthah on the Gileadite. Okay, so what exactly are they doing? Are they going to where she is, or are they going somewhere and mourning her? So are we mourning her death, or are we mourning her maidenhood?
Well, I'm bursting to say something, but I don't want to interrupt.
You can say it. You say it.
Well, Hannah wanted a son to give to the temple, to the tabernacle.
Right.
We have 2 references in scripture, one in Exodus and one in connection with Eli's sons, that they were women who served at the temple, at the tabernacle.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's important to me. I think she was dedicated to serve at the tabernacle, whatever the women did there.
Okay, well, I would dispute that. What you're talking about at the beginning of Samuel, Eli's sons are abusing those women.
Oh yeah, I know they are. Yes,
but
right.
the word there, I've always understood it not to be women who serve in the tabernacle, but women who've come to the tabernacle. In other words, they're there.
So. I don't know.
They're not there because they have a job. They're there in the same way that Hannah's there. The women who come to beseech the Lord, to bring an offering, not that they are actually in service.
Well, look at Exodus 38:8 and see what the Hebrew, what it would say.
Okay.
Another place that mentions them.
Exodus 38.
38:8.
Yeah. From the mirrors of the women who perform tasks at the entrance of yeah, you're right. It's the same word, by the way. In Hebrew, it's exactly the same word.
Is it? Okay. Yeah.
Asher tzav'u petach ohel moed. But again, I always interpret that and understood that as not being a permanent servant in the tabernacle, but the people who came to serve in the tabernacle because they came for their, they brought their offering, they came, whatever.
But it sounds like they stayed, I could take it without knowing the Hebrew, that permanent there, you know, semi-permanent.
I see that. I've never heard that before.
Well, I got it from rabbinic sources way back.
No, it's very possible. I'm just not familiar with it.
No, I know, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because it gives an alternate.
It's definitely an alternative, and whatever it is, whether she would have served in the tabernacle or served somewhere on her own out there somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, that would definitely give us an easier way to deal with what actually happened here, because you would kind of want to believe that in the same way that God prevented Abraham from sacrificing Isaac, there would have been some prevention of sacrificing Jephthah's daughter. Now, we're just about to the end here, but I just want to bring up one thing. It's a fascinating midrash. The midrash itself is extremely critical of Jephthah and what happened, and this particular one says as follows. It says Phinehas was around at the time. Okay, now that makes sense. We last met Phinehas in Joshua chapter 22. And here's a very interesting, a story that we will take up next week. We continue the story of Jephthah. But there's that situation where the tribes on the eastern side of the Jordan set up some kind of a monument, and everyone on the western side are concerned that this might be setting up a competition from Shiloh. And it's Phinehas who goes with a delegation of people to the 2.5 tribes on the west, to Reuben and Gad in particular, and says to them, well, what's the problem? What's going on here? He ends up being a person who diffuses the situation. He solves the problem and helps them all understand that there's no fight here, there's no arguments, and he becomes a very peace brokering kind of figure in that. Now, we do meet Phinehas again at the very end of the book of Judges, but there are many people that assume that the very end of the book of Judges actually happens earlier, and one of the reasons they feel that way is because of the appearance of Phinehas, who would have been by that time hundreds of years old, okay? So the question is, how late in the book of Judges is the story of Jephthah? Is Phinehas still around or not? But I would like to say, regardless of whether he is around or not, the story itself that I'm about to tell you has a very powerful message. The story says as follows. During that time of Jephthah, Phinehas was around. Phinehas, the great priest, who could have easily told Jephthah, guided Jephthah as to how to get out of his vow. There is a procedure in Judaism. If you make a vow that you cannot keep up, you can go through a procedure to change, cancel, retract your vow. That procedure exists. And basically, the sages are saying, there was a wise man of the generation. Now, if it wasn't Phinehas, it could have been somebody else. It doesn't matter. Why wasn't Jephthah saying, oh my, where is the sage in the area that will give me advice on what I can do to get out of my vow? But what does this continue saying? It says, but Jephthah said, me, I'm the leader of the nation. I'm the great military hero. I'm not going to go to the sage. He needs to come to me. And the sage, Phinehas, says, me, I'm the high priest. I'm the descendant of Aaron. I'm a holy person. I'm not the one who's supposed to go to Jephthah. He's supposed to come to me. And in the process of these two stubborn, arrogant people, a girl was lost. That's how this story ends, which is so powerful, so powerful. And in the end, it also says that both of them were punished. That Jephthah was punished, and the way he was killed and buried, and that we can deal with next week. And Phinehas was punished in losing he lost his prophecy. He lost the Spirit of God, and that we'll see at the end of the book of Judges when we deal with the story of the concubine of Gibeon. Okay, so hold that thought, okay, and we'll see exactly what happens. But I think the message here is so powerful as well. You have two leaders, and this is something we can all relate to so much in what we see today. You have two leaders with egos that if they would come together, they could solve a problem. They could save lives. And sometimes when the two leaders each may have been righteous, it may have been talented, it may have been all these other things, but then when they let that whatever talent, holiness, whatever, go to their heads and become arrogance, they'll kill a girl in the process. And that is a very, very powerful message. Anyway, we are done for today. We will pick this up next week and continue on to see the terrible civil war that comes in the aftermath of this entire process. Anyone have any more comments or questions? You can.
Sondra, there's a comment in the chat box. I don't know if you want to check that out.
All right, let me take a look. Hebrew v'haya, that is both whatsoever and whosoever. It's not v'haya. V'haya hayotze. Exactly. V'haya can be either an animal or a something or a someone. Right. Absolutely.
Well, Sondra, I apologize for bringing such Gentile thinking into this discussion, because we totally forgot that only certain animals that God ordained, only certain things were to be sacrificed to him. And whereas with Gentiles, we would just sacrifice anything.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you something. First of all, please don't apologize. And second of all, I don't know that it's Gentile thinking. I just think when we are dealing with scripture, there's so many pieces of information. And if we don't always remember all the puzzle pieces, we might come up with something wrong. But on the other hand, look how much interesting commentary comes out. We all come from different backgrounds, Gentile and Jewish. We are reading the same scripture. And I think every one of us has something very valuable to contribute. And that's what makes our classes, I think, so interesting.
Thank you.
With pleasure. Okay. Have a good night, everybody. I hope to see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Okay.
I hope you enjoyed that film. And we have lots more film content and emails and articles that I'm sure you will enjoy as well. Check out our website at CFOIC.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that right from the homepage. I know you will really enjoy the content that will land in your inbox on a regular basis. Hope to see you soon.